Yesterday, news came out of occupied Palestine that political prisoner Walid Daqqa had died in Israeli jail. Walid was arrested in 1986 for killing an Israeli soldier, and he was set to be released next year after serving 38 years in Israeli jail. But instead of living to see his release, Walid died of something that Palestinians call a slow killing. A slow killing is a systemic Israeli policy that targets terminally ill Palestinians being held in Israeli jails. They are denied the medical aid and access to medical care that they need in order to survive in Israeli jail. In Walid's case, he had a form of terminal cancer. Walid was one of the most prominent Palestinian political prisoners being held in Israeli custody. During his time in jail, he had written several books, and one of them was actually a children's book. While there is so much to say about the general treatment of Palestinians in Israeli jails and the concept of slow killing, I think the most intriguing and miraculous and important part of Walid's story is actually about his daughter, Milad. In 1999, Walid got married behind bars to his wife, Sanat. After over 20 years of marriage, Walid and Sanat had welcomed their daughter, Milad, in 2020. Now, before I continue this story, it's important to know that Israel does not allow conjugal visits for Palestinian prisoners, which is something actual democracies allow. Leading me to segue into what I think is probably one of the most underreported, underrated, miraculous parts of Palestinian resistance and existence in Palestine. Sperm smuggling. Indigenous communities believe that birthing children is a form of revolution, and just because we are being held illegally in prisons by our occupiers does not mean that we're going to forego that act of revolution. There are more than 7,000 Palestinian men who are trapped in Israeli prisons that are being held without trial for years-long sentences with little to no hope of ever being released. And as we've seen since October of 2023, that number of Palestinians being kidnapped and held hostage in Israeli jails is rapidly increasing. The kidnapping of these young men and separating them from their loved ones, their wives, their partners, is a direct link to Israel's attempt to decrease the Palestinian population, which is another aspect of intent for genocide, but that's for another video. Anyway, these young men who get married behind bars or go in married, being separated from their wives, are again not allowed conjugal visits. But Palestinians will always find a way to have babies. So, through this system of smuggling sperm and transporting it out of Israeli jails into the hands of doctors at fertility clinics around occupied Palestine, Palestinian families have figured out how to still partake in that revolutionary act of bearing children and growing your family. In the last decade, since sperm smuggling became a thing, there are about 120 Palestinian babies that have been conceived through this process with IVF. And while this is something that is very expensive, it costs about 25,000 shekels or 7,000 US dollars to go through with this procedure. There are some fertility clinics around Palestine that will do implantations for free for prisoners' wives. And while this is an amazingly creative and incredible act of defiance that Palestinians have figured out how to do, it's important to recognize that this is still something that's very dangerous and comes with repercussions once discovered that you have had a child through this process. It's also an incredibly daunting experience for the Palestinian families going through this process, in particular the children and the mother. These children who are born throughout this process are raised without their fathers being physically present because they are trapped in Israeli jails. Pregnancy and childbirth are scary and exhausting, and Palestinian mothers have to go through it without their partners. When it comes to the types of punishment that these Palestinian prisoners are at risk of facing if caught smuggling their sperm out of prison, it is things like physical torture by Israeli guards, psychological torture in the form of solitary confinement for an unspecified amount of time, to anything from an extended prison sentence. And to add to that punishment, the Israeli court system and government does not recognize the existence of these Palestinian children who are born through this process. So in some cases, these Palestinian fathers never actually get to meet their children in the flesh, and these children never get to meet their fathers. Given his long-term sentence, Walid had requested through Israeli courts that he be granted the right to have children with his wife, a request that was, of course, denied. So when it was discovered that Walid had found a way to defy the Israeli courts and the prison system, he faced harsh repercussions. Walid's sentence was extended, and he was denied family visitation and the right to visit his daughter. If you'd like to learn more about this specific form of Palestinian resistance, you can watch this 2015 documentary called Smuggling Sperm, or you can watch the 2017 short film on Netflix called Bonbonnet. I think that's how you say it. I share this story with you in an effort to honor the life of Walid Daqqa and his commitment to resistance and building a legacy that he leaves behind through his young daughter Milad. Long live the resistance.